Good evening. My name is Simon Plazolles-Hayes, and I'm from the town of Delaware, Ohio, in the United States of America. When I was 10 years old, my family and I moved to the countryside, where my parents started their own farm. Morning and night, we worked on this farm, tending to our goats, sheep, chickens, llamas, and occasionally, ducks. The best way for me to learn how to take care of these animals and how to become a farmer was by being a part of my local 4-H club. 4-H is an international, agricultural-based youth organization that teaches kids leadership and responsibility by having them take various projects from a wide variety of options. I took a lot of projects throughout my time in 4-H, but one of the ones that's most memorable to me is market lambs. The way that the Market Lamb project worked was that I was given a responsibility over one of our newborn baby lambs in February that I would then take to the fair in September. Market lambs, like other market animals, were to be shown, ranked, and then auctioned. I would show my lamb on a Sunday, and on Wednesday, he would go to auction. During the auction, I would walk my lamb into the ring, where the bidding would commence. And when the highest bid was taken, I had to take my lamb back to his pen, to wait for the men to come and collect him, put him on the trailer that would go to the slaughterhouse. I remember when I left the stage, the feeling of pride and happiness of having just sold my lamb had turned to remorse and guilt. Upon the realization that I had just sold out my friend, the pet that I had known since it was born. I would sit next to his pen and I would try to reason with myself, and I would tell myself that this was normal, this was natural, and this was right. And when the men finally came to collect my lamb, I would apologize to him one final time. But the feelings of remorse and guilt, I suppressed them for every year that I took that project. I had my final fair when I was 17 years old, because less than a week after I turned 18, I enlisted in the United States Army as an infantryman. As an infantryman, I was my country's strength in war and her deterrent in peace. I trained to be the most effective fighter that I could be for my country. But when we weren't training, my time was my own. In the fall of 2013, my friend and fellow soldier invited me to his wedding in rural Pennsylvania. The night of the wedding, we were celebrating next to a bonfire when out of nowhere, this cat jumped up into my lap, curled up, and fell asleep. I never considered myself much of an animal person, but I really liked this cat. So I was shocked when the hostess told me that because this cat was a stray, her husband was going to shoot him. I knew that I could not leave that cat there with his death sentence. So with the help of a few other people at the wedding, I was able to sneak the cat out the following morning. Now, I had nowhere else to go. I had to return to my duty station. As a single soldier, I was living in the barracks, where we weren't allowed to keep plants in our room, let alone animals. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, under the cover of darkness, I snuck the cat in through my window, and I kept him in my barracks room for a few days until I could sneak him back out again, back to safety, and back to my parents' farm. Nearly a year had passed since I had done this, but my actions had really stuck with me, and I began to question why I did what I did. Why did I go out of my way to help that cat? Was there a real difference between that cat and the animals that I eat? In fact, the whole thing made me start to question the perception that I held about animals. Because up until this point, I saw that there was mankind and that there were animals here for the purposes of mankind. But now I started to wonder whether this was ethical, logical, or even necessary. What I was experiencing was something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when a new set of ideas and beliefs contradict and challenge your old set of ideas and beliefs. And in order to resolve this inner conflict, something about your ideas and beliefs needs to change. So when I could no longer answer my own questions, and when I could no longer defend my own actions, I knew that I had to make a change. So I became a vegetarian as a part of a 2-week trial. Now, a vegetarian doesn't consume any products that come from a dead animal. But if the animal doesn't die to produce it, like dairy, eggs, or wool, then it's okay. This in and of itself, though, was a very big leap for me, because my whole life I had been staunchly opposed to the ideas of vegetarianism, animal welfare, and animal rights. I became a vegetarian in August of 2014, and I was honorably discharged from the Army in February of 2015. My 2-week vegetarian trial continued indefinitely, and I was very surprised by how little I missed meat. However, I still saw this as a very personal choice, and I didn't want to make it a focal point about my life. But in April of 2015, I hit another point of realization with the death of my grandmother. My grandmother, Plazolles-Hayes, was a remarkable woman. She had 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren. I remember after her funeral, some ladies from her church brought food for the mourners at a reception. But when I got up to serve myself a plate of food, I found that all of the main dishes had contained meat. I was disgusted, and I had to leave the church and try to clear my head by going on a walk. During that walk, I started to ask myself even more questions. Because we were there to mourn the loss of a loved one, yet how many mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters were slaughtered for it? Honestly, how many animals died just to mark her death? It was outside of that church where I began to truly comprehend mankind's complete control over animals. Now I was, and I still am, learning about the suffering of animals. Because when we're eating animals, and when we're wearing animals, and when we're farming animals, we don't feel like we're doing anything wrong. Because what we're doing, it's just life as we know it. But when we stop doing this, and we take a step back, and we critically analyze our actions, and the price that the animals pay for our actions, it all begins to seem so wrong. Now, I told myself that I was a vegetarian because I cared about the welfare of animals. But when I did further research into the modern dairy and egg industry, I actually found that this was contrary to those beliefs. Because while laying an egg and being milked won't normally kill the animal, the industries themselves are just as cruel. Because in the egg-laying industry, males pose no use. So the day that a male chick is born, it's killed. The hens will live out the remainder of their lives in cramped conditions, laying eggs until their bodies can't produce any more. And then they are sent to the slaughterhouse. Dairy is cruel because it involves the forced impregnation of the cows to create the milk production, which directly leads to the veal industry. And when these cows spend their whole lives continuously giving birth and being milked and giving birth and being milked and giving birth and being milked until they're physically unable to do either, the reward, they get sent to the slaughterhouse. Dairy is actually so bad that here in the UK, the Advertising Standards Agency approved an advert that labeled dairy as inhumane. So I took the next step, and I became a vegan, which means that I don't eat, wear, use, consume anything that comes from animals. So what have I learned from all of this? To start out as a meat-eating farmer, only to go into the complete opposite direction? I can stand up here and I can continue to tell you the ways how animals are used and abused, but what I want to emphasize is that there is a disconnect between humans and animals. That for the most part, we would have saved that cat, but still killed that lamb. I know that there are those who are against the ideas of veganism or animal rights, or simply don't understand where we are coming from, or don't believe that they are doing anything wrong in their treatment of animals. Because when we go to zoos, we don't empathize with the animals and consider what it must be like, restricted to a small portion of land. And when people go hunting, they always claim that they have this great respect for the animal. But then they proceed to kill the one that they claim to respect, and they pose next to the dead body. We bring dead beings to mourn at funerals. And as farmers and 4-H'ers, we claim that no one cares more for the animals under our responsibility than us, but we continue to send them to the slaughterhouse. I believe that we are under a spell of tradition and normality that tells us it's okay to do these things, even though we know that animals are sentient, intelligent, and have the ability to suffer. We tell ourselves it's okay because that's just the way that it's always been. But that's the same bad argument that's been used to persecute members of the LGBT community. It's the same bad argument that's been used to tell women that they couldn't be anything more than mothers. It's the same bad argument that humanity has used throughout history to try to justify terrible things. That they are different than us. And this somehow gives us a right to treat them horribly. This idea affects every single one of us on earth. We as human beings are not alone in this world. We share this planet with over 8.5 million different species. I'm not asking you to change your religion. And I'm not asking you to change your political party. But what I am asking is that you take your current held values, beliefs, logic, and ethics, and then compare that to your attitude and treatment towards animals. Ask yourself, is this ethical? Is this logical? Is this necessary? Is this good for the planet? Good for the animals? And good for yourselves? My whole life, I learned how to disengage. I learned to suppress my remorse and my guilt towards animals, and I learned not to hesitate to take a life to defend others. In regards to the animals that we eat, that we wear, that we use for our experiments and for our own entertainment, we push out the bad thoughts. We scroll past that video that documents realities for animals, and we walk past that activist in the street because to stop and stare is simply too distressing for us. But rather than admit that the distress, the disgust, the sadness, and the horror that we feel when we come face to face with these realities, rather than admit that those are our true feelings towards these industries, we ignore it. We put up walls and we swallow the product. I'm not here to make you feel judged. I'm here because I swallowed that lie too. But with one small act of kindness, I learned that there is a man-made problem for animals, and that we need to work together to address this problem rather than continuing to ignore it and hoping that it will simply go away. Don't let apathy, tradition, or ignorance excuse you from allowing this cruelty to continue. And don't wait for your own epiphany before you challenge your views on animals. Thank you.